Hello, and the purpose of this video is to serve as part two in the series in which I discuss the far left media that I look at on a daily basis, right? And the reason I'm doing this part two video is because when I reviewed the first video in order to do editing, I realized that I had left out a lot of information that I needed to talk about too. There is a number of other publications that I look at also on a regular or daily basis that I didn't mention, and I need to do that. But before I do that, I want to recap on the reason why I ignore establishment media. And I mean both the Swedish establishment media, the English language corporate media, and false alternatives to the Western media such as RT, Press TV, Correo del Orinoco, or Cuba Debate, right? Those are not legitimate alternatives to the Western media establishment. They simply mirror the Western media establishment, which is not the same as being an alternative to it. For an alternative to it, you need to look at the far left perspectives, but don't let the control factors take over, right? No, just consult them. Anyhow, Noam Chomsky wrote, and I quote him in the about section to this channel: "The smart way to keep people passive and obedient is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion, but allow very lively debate within that spectrum." Noam Chomsky. And Noam Chomsky, of course, is the author of the classical critique of Western media called Manufacturing Consent, right? So that's the reason I look at alternatives. I look at the alternative far left and press rather than establishment media. And yeah, I have my two control factors, the Mises Institute and the Philadelphia Trumpet. Now back to the bulk of the media I consume, which is the far left press. And again, 80% of my media consumption is far left. So back to the Swedish far left, I neglected to mention one publication that I look at often, and that is Internationalen. It's a very, very good newspaper too. And just now they have number 15, 2022. And it is about the whole issue of NATO, because Finland and Sweden are considering joining NATO. So yeah, but and there's also an article. The focus article is about the war in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine, imperialism, etc. So yeah, and there are other things about Swedish domestic politics. For example, time for a new housing policy campaign day. All right, so there you go. That's the type of article that they have in Internationalen. Very, very good newspaper. Very, very good newspaper. I look at them often. It's very good. Swedish far left media. And again, I apologize to the people and the editors and people who put together Internationalen that I didn't mention them in the first video. I sort of overlooked them. And the thing is that that video went 40 minutes, and I'm trying to keep these videos, as short as possible, within 30 minutes. So that's why. But I'm mentioning them now, so I'm making up for it now. Let's see. Now, to get out of Sweden, right, into the United States, right? Up until March of 2019, I also used to follow the work of Socialist Worker, which was the publication of the International Socialist Organization. But the International Socialist Organization ceased to exist in March of 2019. However, their archive is still online, and in the archive they have the Where We Stand statement, which is, the Where We Stand statement is the classic statement of American revisionist Trotskyism. It's a gem. I love this statement because it sort of summarizes the politics of revolutionary socialism in a very simple way. It was the hallmark of the International Socialist Organization, the Where We Stand statement. Whenever you met their campaigners, the first thing they would hand you is like a leaflet with the Where We Stand statement, and then any sort of discussion would proceed from there, from the statement and whatever, and then they would plug in the books and everything else in the meeting and what have you. But they started always with the Where We Stand statement. That's how I got introduced to the International Socialist Organization, because I look at a poster. It was like a leaflet, a small poster on a wall, and then they were talking about the Ralph Nader campaign. So I went to their meeting, and it was a meeting endorsing Ralph Nader. and I was a volunteer in the Ralph Nader presidential campaign. So I got interested in them, and anyways, that began my relationship with far leftism. And this was back in 1996 when I was 21, right? 21-ish, those years. But anyways, this is the Where We Stand statement, of the International Socialists, and you can find it, of course, there. There it says, socialistworker.org, right? Socialistworker.org, Where We Stand statement, of the International Socialist Organization, socialistworker.org. And, it covers socialism, not capitalism, workers' power, revolution, internationalism, full equality and liberation, the Revolutionary Party, a very, very, very short, blurbs on those issues, very short, concise, but it tells you everything, and then I've already covered the Where We Stand statement in another video. And I will link to it in the description. In a first season video, I covered this, the Where We Stand statement. But anyways, here it is, support the Socialist Worker Archive website. The archive website is there, in the archive website, you can find all the articles prior to 2019, where you can analyze, I guess you can analyze the history, the people's history is sort of like from the revolutionary socialist perspective, if you want. That would be the archive website. So. Yeah, so that's the ISO, Socialist Worker. The other American socialist organization that puts out a Where We Stand statement is The Militant, and The Militant, of course, is the publication of the United States Socialist Workers Party, not to be confused with the British Socialist Workers Party. The United States Socialist Workers Party was the party of James P. Cannon, and in the 30s, 40s. I think it was mostly in the 40s and 50s. It was the party of American Trotskyism, and then in the 60s, it changed and it became pro-Cuban. But so yeah, it has Trotskyist roots, and then it became pro-Cuban, right? They went from Trotskyist to Guevarista. Socialist Workers Party, and is there Socialist Workers Party, The Militant, their version of what the Where We Stand statement, another statement of American revolutionary socialism. Now Guevaristas, I suppose. But, yeah, and it says here, the Socialist Workers Party presents a fighting working class program. We need to organize to fight growing employer attacks on our jobs, wages, and working conditions, So, yeah, millions need jobs today. Workers need their own party, a labor party. Workers' control of production. Farmers, workers, allies on the land. Amnesty for all undocumented immigrants, oppose Washington's wars, for recognition of Israel and of a contiguous Palestinian state. Yeah, they believe in the two-state solution. Cuba's revolution, an example. The Cuban Revolution in 1959 showed it is possible for workers and farmers to transform themselves in struggle, to take political power and uproot capitalist exploitation. End the U.S. rulers' economic war against Cuba. U.S. out of Guantanamo, because, they're Guevarista now. They used to be Trotskyist in the 30s and 40s, but after the 60s they turned Guevarista. So now they see Cuba as the model. They were never pro-Soviet. They were pro-Cuba. Cuba is their model, right? And yeah, so I couldn't join them because I am critical of my perspective on Cuba is critical of the whatever, but I'm not going to get into that. Again, my perspective on Cuba was support for the left opposition, which is Democratic Socialist Current. Socialist Workers Party of the United States is opposed to Democratic Socialist Current, opposed to the left opposition inside Cuba. So because they say they're counter-revolutionary, that fly the red flag to oppose the red flag, as Mao Zedong said. They don't use those terms. They're not Maoists, but same idea. Anyways, I'm not going to get into the dispute between Corriente Socialista Democrática and Socialist Workers Party. I'm not going to get into that. Anyways, healthcare for all, women's right to abortion, defend political rights, defend the rights of prisoners. So yeah, that's, the American Socialist Workers Party, The Militant, right? The Militant, Socialist Workers Party campaign, Where We Stand, right? So yeah. Next people, of course, is the British Socialist Workers Party, which publishes also the Socialist Worker, the British Socialist Worker, right? socialist worker, the British socialist worker. And again, there is, okay, up until 2001, the International Socialist Organization of the United States and the British Socialist Workers' Party were together. They were sister organizations organizing something called the IST. But in 2001, they split over the issue of anti-capitalism because the Socialist Workers' Party put out this theory of anti-capitalism theory and practice that in context of intervening in the anti-globalization movement, they were going to talk about anti-capitalism and not revolutionary socialism. And then the ISO objected to that if you substitute anti-capitalism for Marxism, you're diluting the Marxist and Trotskyist message. So they split over the issue of anti-capitalism in 2001. And, after that, you have two tendencies of revisionist Trotskyism. You had the American tendency of revisionist Trotskyism, personified by the International Socialist Organization, and you had the British tendency of revisionist Trotskyists, the Cliff Kalinikos tendency of revisionist Trotskyists, which is the British. So you have a British variant of revisionist Trotskyists, and you had an American variant of revisionist Trotskyism. The American variant of revisionist Trotskyism came to an end in 2019, March of 2019. However, the British variable continues, and they published, Socialist Worker, the British version of it. And, here is their ideas and theory section in their website is when they discuss, is their version of the Where We Stand statement, basically, and they quote Lenin, without revolutionary theory, there can be no revolutionary movement. And, the International Marxist tendency quotes that too everywhere, It's a very famous quote from Lenin. It's like the quote from Lenin, Actually, I can show you right here. The International Marxist tendency quotes that too, and I can show you really quick. Because I'm reading this other book. Here it is, here, this is the Swedish version of that statement, right, yeah. So yeah, this is, Trotskyists love to quote that. That is the favorite Trotskyist quote of Lenin, Trotsky, that is the main, when you talk to a Trotskyist, they quote that. They always quote that. Without revolutionary theory, there can be no revolutionary movement, right? Okay, and they go here, the ideas of the ruling class, wrote Karl Marx, are in every epoch the ruling ideas. So for revolutionary Marxist organizations, such as the Socialist Workers' Party, which are opposed to the whole of capitalist society, having our own theory, our own ideas is vitally important, right? So yeah, so in anyways, they go on to point out, there is the SWP-TV, which is the British Socialist Workers' Party YouTube channel, SWP-TV, right? And I subscribe to it, and I follow their work. International Socialism Journal, which is their theoretical journal. Pamphlets, you can browse and download a selection of pamphlets online and order the latest ones from our shop. So you can, pamphlets are there. An educational program, along with our regular meetings on political topics, the Socialist Workers' Party organizes educational courses that help members to get the grips with Marxist theory. And in Sweden, if you go to the Marxist.se, if you go to their Aktiviteter, in Swedish Aktiviteter activities page, they have like online meetings all the time. Like they have, or either online or physical meetings, educational meetings, open education meetings. Communist Manifesto, what is Marxism, the ideas of Rosa Luxemburg, the transitional program of Leon Trotsky, etc. So in Sweden, if you are interested in Sweden, svenska, you can go to their Marxist.se and they have this. Anyways, the version of the Socialist Workers' Party, the British Socialist Workers' Party, Where We Stand statement, introductions to Marxism is the first thing, introductions to Marxism. The state, what is class, what is class, Lenin and the Revolutionary Party, revolutions and revolutionary struggles, why Stalinist Russia wasn't socialist, and that is very, why Stalinist Russia wasn't socialist, that is a key tenet of revisionist Trotskyism, and revisionist Trotskyism argues that, okay, I'm just going to read. One of the Socialist Workers' Party founders, Tony Clift, argued Russia and its puppet states in Eastern Europe had become a form of bureaucratic state capitalism. Today, this theory still applies to officially socialist states such as China and Cuba. Okay, that's the official position of the Socialist Workers' Party. That is, in a nutshell, their position of revisionist Trotskyism. And the reason they are revisionist Trotskyists is because Leon Trotsky defined the Soviet Union as a bureaucratically deformed worker state, whereas Tony Cliff defined it as a bureaucratic state capitalism. So Tony Cliff is revised Trotsky. So that's why they're revisionist Trotskyists. Okay, and the American version, Variety, also the International Socialist Organization, in the Where We Stand statement, if you look at it, if we look very quickly at the Where We Stand statement, same thing, in the Where We Stand statement of the International Socialist Organization, the American revisionist Trotskyists, China and Cuba, like the former Soviet Union and Eastern Bloc, have nothing to do with socialism. We support the struggles of workers in these countries against the bureaucratic ruling class. Okay, and in this version of the statement, they took out the language. After 2001, when they split with the Socialist Workers' Party, they took out a sentence where they defined the Soviet Union and Eastern Bloc as state capitalist. They took that out, and they just say have nothing to do with socialism, and they jump directly to we support the struggles of workers in these countries against the bureaucratic ruling class. In other words, they don't specifically define after 2001 the Soviet Union as a state capitalist, right? They leave it open. You could believe if it's a bureaucratically deformed worker state or state capitalist. It's all up to you. What matters is that we support the struggles of workers in these countries against the bureaucratic ruling class. Period. Now, in saying bureaucratic ruling class, they assume the theory of state capitalism, but they don't say it. But that's another issue, and I'm not going to get into the whole. I'm not going to get into another revisionist Trotskyist theory is the theory of bureaucratic collectivism, and Tony Cliff criticized that, but that theory didn't really pan out. It didn't survive. And there was another one of proletarian Bonapartism, which was fronted by Ted Grant. And those theories didn't really pan out, in the end. Anyways, but that's something else. Back to the media I look at, far left media I look at. Of course, In Defense of Marxism, the main website of the International Marxist Tendency, In Defense of Marxism. I subscribe to them, and I get their newsletter every day. They have articles every day. I get their and this is an article criticizing the Morenoite tendency of Trotskyism, which Argentine Trotskyism, right? Yeah, and they say here, Argentine Trotskyist movement. No, okay, here is a critique of Nahuel Moreno, right? The Nahuel Moreno was the Argentinian Trotsky. Supposedly, he was like the Argentinian version of James P. Cannon or whatever, Gary Healy maybe, or what have you. Okay, Nahuel Moreno, a leader of the Argentine Trotskyist movement, who historically swung back and forth between ultra-leftism and opportunism. So they have a critique of the Morenoites, errors of the Morenoites, right? So that's a really interesting article. I was looking at that earlier. It was really fun to read. I love polemical articles when the Trotskyist tendencies attack each other. I love those. Those are great. Yeah. Anyways, let's see. Okay, now to step out of Trotskyism. Right now I'm going to step out of Trotskyism. Another newspaper I subscribe to. I get their. You can subscribe them. I get their updates. And it says here. Get updates. All you have to do is type in your email. Get the latest updates from Workers' World. You type in your email address up there, and you get a daily digest with the latest articles. Workers' World is a publication of the Workers' World Party, and their slogan is, their masthead is, "Workers and oppressed peoples of the world unite." And they publish, Workers' World and Mundo Obrero. Workers' World, and they're bilingual. They publish in Spanish and English. American, They're non-Trotskyist left, Workers' World, Mundo Obrero. I would say they are the equivalent in Sweden to the Kommunistiska Partiet. All right. And, Sam Marcy, which is the man who founded this movement, or one of them, he wrote a really interesting book called A Marxist Critique of Perestroika, which is really good. I read that book. That book is very good. He looked at, as opposed to Gary Healy, who was the British Trotskyist who said that Mikhail Gorbachev represented the political revolution. Sam Marcy and the Workers' World Party in the United States said, no, this is a form of capitalist restoration. And he wrote a book criticizing glasnost and perestroika from a Marxist perspective. So that's really interesting. So this would be them. So, yeah. And, they have a section here, revolutionary theory and practice, counter the big lie, support workers' world, Let's see what that's it. Counter the big lie. I like that. When the corporate media delivers a single position 24/7, focusing on an enemy, when they demonize that country's leader, when opposing voices are buried in an avalanche of distortions and outright lies, where can political people find the antidote to the big lie? They can turn to workers' world, right? Counter the big lie. Support workers' world. I would say counter the big lie. Look at the far left media, right? Yeah. So yeah, yeah. Anyways, that's workers' world, and of course there will be links in the description to all these papers and stuff. Then of course Liberation newspaper, Liberation, which is the newspaper of the American Party of Socialism and Liberation. The Party of Socialism and Liberation. And, young people in SVERIGES Kommunistiska Ungdom, the youth wing of the SVERIGES Kommunistiska Partei, are into PSL. A lot of them are into PSL. So, a lot of the Swedish communist youth associated with the SVERIGES Kommunistiska Ungdom, not all of them, but many of them follow Liberation and the work of PSL, Party of Socialism and Liberation in the United States. And I love this. I love this article. Disband NATO, right? Disband NATO or whatever. Like, they're anti-NATO, right? They protest against NATO in the United States. They're so brave. I love them. I love them. Yeah. So, yeah. The billions of dollars that are being provided to Ukraine in order to continue to escalate and drag out the war could and should be used to provide relief to the millions of workers who are suffering and struggling every day inside the so-called richest country on earth. Instead, as always, the government has chosen to put its money towards death and destruction on top of the $813.3 billion already proposed for a U.S. war spending this year. So that's that's the PSL, Party of Socialism and Liberation, disband NATO, right? They want to disband NATO, right? Oh, and it's cool because you can always download, from all their articles, you can download the PDF flyer, right? Bye.